So, welcome to the second week of this course on managing change in organizations, and in this week basically we will talk about the need and scope for change. Remember, in the first week we talked about the nature of the change, where we tried to explain what is change, and then we also try to see what the different kind of changes that happens in the organization, that is related to incremental and transformational changes. So, these are the two major type of changes happens. Now, moving further, we said that organizations need to continuously improve and innovate themselves to remain viable and competitive. Now, taking this stand position, it is important for organizations to identify the environment in which they are operating, because the pressure for change comes from the environment. Now, what we are going to discuss in this week is what are the different kind of pressures that is coming from the environment, both the external environment and also the internal environment, because external and internal environment creates some kind of pressures for organizations to change. So, the basic question that we are going to address here is that why we go for a change. Is there a need for a change, and if the need is, from how we identify the need for the change. So, with this premise we move further and discuss certain things. Basically, the concept that we are trying to cover here is that yes, how to identify the need for the change through internal and external change pressures, and then what is the scope of change. Remember, we talked about different kind of change that happens: strategy, culture, technology, system, process. So, we will discuss them in detail, but before that what we are going to discuss is that what are the various pressures that work for, because of which the organizations go for a change. Now, in continuation with this, we need to discuss about that why organizations go for a change, because if you look at change, any change has associated risk with it, because sometimes what may happen that if you go for a change, it may succeed or may not succeed, depending upon how accurately you have been able to predict the environmental conditions, right. So, sometimes you are in a correct position to assess the environment and then you successfully implement the change. Sometimes you are not able to correctly identify the environment, or sometimes things are beyond your control in the environment and you cannot do anything for it. And then it engages or it suggests that yes, there are certain risks which is associated with any kind of change which organizations go for, right. So, it is very important for organizations to understand the risks associated with any kind of change that they want to bring it, and see that it is going to be successful, right. So, you know that most of the organizations go for a change, but they do not succeed, right, and they are not able to achieve the intended outcomes in terms of implementing change successfully, right. But still you will find that yes, all kind of organizations go for some kind of changes. It means that change is a continuous process through which all organizations have to go through, because if they do not go for changes, bringing about change in their system, culture, system or processes, they will not be able to survive tomorrow, right. Now, what is going to change depends upon the triggers that is coming from the environment. Now, if you look at the pressure that creates trigger for change in the organization, come from two sources, that is external environment and also the internal organizations. So, there could be pressure within the organization or the pressure could be from the external environment, right. Because sometimes you need to go for a change because there are certain internal pressure, right. You need to bring about change in your HR policy, right. You need to bring about change in your working, right. So, these are internal pressures. So, sometimes you go for changes because others are doing things in a different way and you need to remain competitive in terms of economic pressure, technical pressure, social cultural pressure, political pressures, right. That is a part of what we call the external environmental pressure. So, we need to clearly understand and assess the environment to identify what kind of pressure the organization is has, because if you are not able to identify the kind of pressure that an environment is creating for a specific organization, you will not be able to identify the domain in which you are working. So, in order to correctly identify the domain of your environment in which you are operating and how much pressure it is creating, it is difficult for you to understand what kind of change would be required by the organization, right. So, this basically try to addresses the question that why should we go for a change, why there is a need for the change. So, moving further, if you look at the theoretical position which suggests that there are two major perspectives to go for a change, that is a economic perspective and also there is a organizational learning perspective. See, economic perspective is that what? This is related to what you call profit maximization. So, any organization that has been established is supposed to satisfy the stakeholders by being more productive, by being more profitable, right, because people have invested money. So, these stakeholders want better return on their money or investments, you can say. So, if organization is not successfully doing or practicing and making profit, then it would be difficult for organizations to continue and survive. So, they need to continuously change in order to ensure that on a regular basis they are able to prove their utility for the stakeholders, they are able to provide good dividends to their stakeholders, they are able to satisfy all stakeholders in the process, right. So, if organization is not able to perform well, then it is not possible, they will not be able to satisfy and maximize the profit, right, satisfy their stakeholders. So, it is very important for organizations to go for a change, so that they are able to satisfy their stakeholders, right. Now, there is another perspective which is organizational learning perspective. See, it is very important if you really want to compete and survive in a competitive environment, that you develop core capabilities, the competence of the organization. Organization must be competent enough to handle the environmental factors. And how are going to handle the environmental factors to compete and survive? Based on your capabilities and the competence. So, it is very much required for the organization to build the competencies in the systems and processes and the people, so that they are able to deal with the change. If your people are competent enough, then they definitely would be handle things in a better way. So, the idea here is that the organization should be in a position to handle the environmental factors based on their capability and competence, because the most important factor for any organization is their people, and if their people are competent, they know how to deal with the situation, then organization will not be having any problem. So, the organization should create conditions to ensure that people in the organization remain and continue to be competent on a regular basis, right. So, you have to say that yes, they create and enable conditions for learning, not at the individual level, collectively, so that everybody learns, and based on this learning they become competent enough to handle the environmental factors which are going to affect them, right. So, these are the two major theoretical positions that have been discussed in the literature, right. That is, either you talk about the utility perspective, that yes, organization is supposed to improve their performance, so that they are able to satisfy their stakeholders, or the people are competent enough to take on the environment, right. Now, discussing this position, we will discuss certain theories which try to explain the change process, right, and the most important is the teleological theories. Okay. What it suggests, basically we have already been talking about, is that modifying the goal or taking actions to achieve them. As a organization, what you are supposed to do? You have certain targets to achieve in terms of productivity, profit, market share, right. So, in order to achieve these goals, what you do? You set your goals, you try to adapt yourself to the changes and see that you implement those changes in order to achieve the goals and objectives of the organization, right. So, you go for there could be a recurrent or a discontinuous sequence, whatever sequence you follow in setting the goal or implementing and adopting is the idea here is that you need to adopt yourself to the changes that is happening in the organization, and accordingly you keep on changing your goals, objectives, and then you keep on evaluating whether you have learned something or not out of it. So, the basic objective of teleological theories is basically learning. Learning to ensure that you are able to adopt the changes that is happening in the environment, you are able to modify your goals and objectives, you are able to take actions that how to implement to achieve success, right. So, this is one theory which talks about basically the change process. In addition to the teleological theories, the next one is dialectical theories. Now, if you look at dialectical theories, it talks about a dilemma that may be there in the organization, because there are different interest groups, there could be suppliers, vendors, employees, managers, stakeholders, right. So, they are the different interest groups. Now, there is a possibility that these interest groups might be having different kind of goals, right. But one thing that is very important is that the managers are supposed to maintain a balance across all these goals to ensure that they are able to satisfy the interest of all the stakeholders. Okay. And if they are not able to bring about sufficient changes, it may not be possible, because everything depends upon the performance of the organization. So, here the learning is that management should ensure that even if there are conflicting goals across different stakeholders having different interests, how they are going to maintain stability. And this is possible only when they are trying to balance the power across opposing entities means say employers and employees, unions and management, right, various stakeholders, because everybody wants something from the organization. So, how are we going to satisfy the requirement of all the stakeholders, because everyone has different interests, and the management here is in a dilemma that what to do in order to maintain balance and bring about some kind of stability which ensures that the different interest groups are satisfied. So, this theory is different in the sense that it does not talk about the process, but it talks about what needs to be done in order to ensure that different interest groups are able to satisfy themselves by their activities and for which the change is required. Now, the third one is life cycle theories. If you look at life cycle theories, it talks about change as a process which progresses through different stages, right. Now, when we say that change progresses through different stages, what does it mean? It means that yes, and these stages means say to start with an organization is born or it is incepted. So, that at the inception stage organization comes out, then it grows, then it matures, and then there is a possibility that it would decline. Now, when we are talking about life cycle, that is this is the life cycle of an organization. Okay, to start with, then it grows, it becomes young, then it reaches to the midlife stage, and then it becomes mature enough. Now, the question is that is it possible to continue and maintain that maturity level? If you are not able to maintain and compete on a regular basis, then you decline. So, what need to be done in order to ensure that you continue to remain at the maturity level? That is where revitalization is required, and this revitalization is what? Bringing about changes in the organization, because if you do not bring about changes at that particular stage, then what will happen? Suppose you are here, so you go down, instead of continue to maintain your upward movement, you go down. So, this needs to be avoided. So, it is very important that you revitalize your organizations. It means that you bring about change in the system, structure, technology, in everything, so that you are able to compete. Now, the thing is that at each and every stage you are engaging in certain activities, right. So, you continue to do those things which are required at a particular stage, so that when you reach to the maturity stage, you know what are the things that you need to do, right. It is not that you are moving jumping from one stage to another stage, you continuously move from one stage to another stage. When an organization is born, in its inception, it is a very small organization with maybe one product, maybe one unit. When it grows, you offer many products, many units, and then it become multiple units. Okay. Maybe you become a multinational tomorrow, right. So, each stage is a necessary precursor for the next stage of the organization, right. So, once you become mature enough, you need to ensure that your longevity is maintained. Otherwise, if you do not take necessary steps to revitalize yourself, then decline is there, nothing can be done. Now, the fourth theory is basically evolutionary theory. It talks about how organizations grow or basically make changes in whatever they are doing, because evolution talks about what? The way you have been doing certain things. For example, you have developed a system of the work processes. Now, you need to bring about a evolution in the process gradually based upon your learning, right. So, some kind of variations will happen the way you have been doing. Say 20 years back, the way you have been recruiting people has gone for a radical change, right. So, there has been evolution of this process today, right. So, what I am talking about here is that change proceeds through a continuous cycle of variation, selection and retention. Part of the process have been left out and other things have been adopted. Look at the supply chain management. Do you think the supply chain in process have not undergone for change? A lot of changes is happening, new things have been added, old things have been discarded, right. So, you talks about variation, selection and retention. What are the things that you continue to do? What are the things that you leave in the process of evolution in order to remain viable and competitive, right. So, and this evolution depends upon what? The kind of resources that you have and what is the requirement of the demand. Say recruitment process, if you want to make it cost effective, right, instead of going for a paper pencil test, you move to an online recruitment system, right, because that is the requirement, because all our other organizations are going for this kind of thing in order to remain competitive. So, you also need to adopt this process, right. So, discarding certain things and taking new things in the process, right. So, you have to see that what are the things that you want to do and what are the things that you do not want to do, or you want to do away with certain things, right. So, these variations are basically could be in terms of inertia and persistence, right. This inertia and persistence would be there if you do not move. If you continue to do the things in a similar way, then you do not change, right. So, the idea here is that this theory talks about that you need to continuously grow and develop yourself, right, so that you remain continue to remain viable for yourself, right. So, after discussing all these theoretical perspectives, let us discuss what are the various forces of the organizational change. As we talked about that the various forces could be classified into internal and external changes, right. So, organization is also a kind of open system, right, and there could be lot of factors which are influencing its day to day activities, right, both internal and external. Now, you have to see that if you really want to be competitive and you want to take up the challenges of the environment, you need to identify what are the internal and external pressures which are going to influence the organization, and then see whether the organization is ready to face these challenges created by the internal and external pressure. So, what we are going to discuss further is what are those changes related to the environmental pressures, right. So, to start with, we will talk about the external forces of organizational change, right. It comes from where? From the external environment. So, the most important factor is the competitive forces, right. See, in whatever market and whatever sector you have been talking about, say aviation, telecom, right, consumer goods, automobile, you will find that there is a lot of competition among various producers, right. So, you need to make changes, right, to ensure that you remain competitive, right. And this being competitive could be on any of these dimensions. Efficiency, you are going to be more efficient in terms of internal operations of your organizations. In terms of quality, the quality of your product and services is better compared to others. The features of your product are definitely good. So, you are more innovative and you are in a better position to respond to the customer requirements, their needs and expectations. So, that you have more loyal and loyal customers who are going to be retained by you. So, these dimensions of basically these dimensions which we have been talking about, like efficiency, quality, innovation and customer responsiveness, these are the parameters which defines the level of competition that you have, and combined together if you are ahead on this, then definitely you are going to be more competitive compared to others, right. Now, if you look at say telecom sector, see which company is going to be ahead compared to other in terms of offering quality products, more innovative services, which is more responsive to customer and which is more efficient in its internal processes. So, based on this you can see which company is doing well. So, if you are not doing well, you need to make attempt to change yourself, so that you are able to exceed your customers, your competitors on these dimensions. Otherwise, what will happen? You will not be able to survive. Look, here I have given certain examples like these Japanese companies like Nissan, Toyota and Mitsubishi. What they do? How they compete with their counterparts? See, what what they have gone here is gone for efficiency. So, what they do? They try to relocate their manufacturing bases in South Asian countries. Why? Because there is a cheap labor, right. They can produce a lot with less resources. So, that is how they are going to achieve efficiency. So, by achieving efficiency, what happens? They would be able to compete, because the cost, production cost would go down, right, while maintaining certain standards of quality for certain markets, right. So, competitive forces are very important. Moving from competitive forces to political forces. Now, political forces could be considered as two different levels, right, at the global level and at the local level, at the national level, right. See how the global political scenario is changing, right. So, if you look at the global politics today, it can be very much seen that the policies, economic policies of the US government or the European Union or the third world countries or the China, how these political forces are basically trying to influence organizations in the form of creating certain challenges in terms of the economic policies, right, regulations that they are trying to bring in different places, they are going to affect the organizations. Say Indian organizations are going to be influenced by the economic policies of the US, right, because many Indian IT companies which have presence in US are not able to depute local people. Now, the US administration wants them to recruit people from the US only to give them more employment. So, this kind of employment policy is going to influence the organization, which is a global political force. Similarly, the political framework and ideology locally is also important, whether you have a left wing politics or right wing politics. So, depending upon the kind of ideology, the political ideology the company has, this political party has, is going to influence the economic policy of the country, right. So, these political forces also become very important in the process. Moving from political forces to economic forces are the most important factors. You know that we are going through a stage of globalization, deregulation, where the national economies have opened, right. So, we are living in an age what you call liberalization, privatization and globalization, LPG economy. Yes, we have moved from what you call a restricted protected economy to a more liberalized say privatized and global economy. So, this kind of economy is going to throw lot of challenges, right. It has created uncertainties and also created opportunities, right. So, if it is creating uncertainty, it means the competitive pressure will go up, So, what are the challenges that is coming up? Like your inflation rate is changing, right? The interest rate is fluctuating, there is economic recession, economic policies on taxes have changed, right? Import export duties have changed. Now, see how the fluctuation in oil prices have impacted companies, right? Even for the same oil, same amount of oil, quantity of oil, you have to pay more, right, because the oil prices have been decided by the OPEC countries, right. So, the kind of financial stability the country is depends upon the political situation, right, consumer confidence towards the economic conditions of the country. So, all these factors are very crucial and they pose lot of economic challenges to the organization, because the way these factors are changing are going to affect the organization. See, so how the change in the global market economies create a ripple like effect and effect in the Indian market in terms of fluctuation in the capital market, unemployment, opportunities rise and fall in the consumer demand. So, all this is going to affect and this is because of the economic forces. Now, moving from economic to the technological forces are the very important. See, the kind of technological advancements that we have today, especially in communication and computer technology, even in manufacturing technology, like we move to more advanced technologies like computer aided technology, flexible manufacturing system, computer integrated manufacturing, right. Added with this is shortening of product life cycle, right. So, all these changes which is happening in the environment is creating lot of challenge for the companies, because they are going to decide the kind of products and services you are going to offer to the consumers, right. So, if you are not able to compete in terms of technology, then what will happen? You will be lagging behind, right. So, it is very important for you to keep pace with these technological changes that is happening and see how they are going to influence the organization and whether you are able to cope up with these technological forces by bringing about a change in your technology through R&D and other activities to ensure your viability. One example that is given here says that how a nation is using IT in planning activities, right. It is the first country in the world which is totally networked, right, and that is why we say that it holds the status of being the world first completely networked economy in the world. Though it is a very small country, but this has brought lot of efficiency. So, how they have used IT networking systems to connect with everything in the nation, okay, because that would bring more transparency, accountability and efficiency in the systems and processes of working of the government, right. So, from technological forces we move to the government regulations, rules and regulations. See any organization which is working in any part of the world is going to be governed and regulated by the law of that particular land, right. So, government regulations are very important, because they are going to intervene and also influence the need for the change, like deregulation. When Indian economy opened, we went for deregulation, then what happened? We went for decentralization of power, right. Then we give more power to the states. We try to see that how deregulations has helped sectors like say insurance, banking, petroleum today, because they are open to market. See, you can see the fluctuations that is happening in the petroleum prices on a regular basis. This is the impact of deregulation. Now, lot of new players have entered into banking and insurance sectors. It is because of the deregulation. So, what will happen if they are going to enter into this sector? You have more competition, right. So, you need to compete. So, now Indian companies have to bring about certain changes, so that they compete with foreign insurance companies or foreign banks, right. Then foreign exchange is very important, right. Foreign exchange basically affect the international trade, right, because if the exchange rate fluctuates, then the payment structure changes, right. So, example here I have taken is like India pays more for oil imports with fluctuation in the dollar value, right, and that is why you will find that sometimes price fluctuation is there. Government cannot do it, because they have deregulated the sector and the price, oil price is decided by the market, not by the government. Government has only some control. They are imposing tax through their tax structure. So, if they are reducing tax, only then the price will come out, otherwise not. Now, there are other factors like antitrust laws are there. In India, we have this MRTP, right, monopolies and restricted trade practices, which have been replaced by ICCI, that is Competition Commission of India. The job of this Competition Commission in India is that there is a fair competition among the organizations, right. So, that you are more transparent and accountable, right, and you do not adopt unfair trade practices. So, the basic objective of CCI is to ensure that companies are not able to adopt unfair trade practices. Then the suspension agreements, right, which is finalized between the government to waive off certain anti-dumping duties, like you know that third world countries have become anti-dumping grounds, right. So, what actually happens, the government decides that if you are going to dump certain products, you have to pay certain taxes. So, the taxes would increase the cost of the product, right. Then the protectionism, how governments are going to protect certain sectors of the economies or the organizations, right. For example, if you look at the defense sector, it is totally protected by the organization, right. So, they enforce certain regulations to intervene or safeguard the threatened industries. So, there are certain industries they know they are not doing well. So, the government trying to protect them, like say Indian Telephone Industries, Fertilizer Corporation of India, right. These are the industries which are totally dependent on the government, otherwise they will not be able to survive. Like for example, in case of handicrafts and textiles, right, the Indian government protected the local industries like handicrafts and textiles. So, what happened, the trade barriers that were there in the form of anti-dumping levy of tariff and import duties and all the kind of things were done away with subsidies. So, government was trying to provide lot of subsidies to this sector to protect the industry in this particular sector, right. So, these are the government forces, and moving from government is also another important factor is the change in the need of preference of the customers. Now, the change in the needs and preference of the customers have also compelled organizations to adopt and innovate their product or services offerings. For example, if you look at McDonald, the kind of product that they offer in US would be different in terms of their tastes and preference in a Chinese market and Indian market, right. So, they try to ensure that the product suits the requirements of the customers in a particular location or a country, right. So, it is very, very important that you need to meet the changing demands of the customers. Not only that you meet the different demands, but you also see that how these demands are changing, right. Say if you look at when the McDonald, what actually happened to start with, you remember we talked about a case where they were forced to go for more healthy products, right. So, reduce their say saturated fat and other kind of things, and because of the continued pressure by the public, the McDonald was forced to come out with healthy products, right. So, that is how sometimes what happens, that you need to meet the changing demand of the customers. Now, you see most of these cold drink companies are trying to change their product portfolio, and they are trying to bring more healthy drinks to the consumers, and this is because people are not interested to go for cold drinks today, and this basically is the result of changes that is happening in the needs and preferences of the customers. And finally, we have ethical forces. This is very, very important, because you need to promote ethical behavior in the organization, okay, and because if you are not going to be ethical in your business, then tomorrow you may not survive. And research has proved it that those businesses who have been operating ethically, they have been able to survive and compete in the long run, right. So, you need to ensure that yes, people follow ethical behavior at the individual level and the organization level also, and if any kind of unethical practices are being adopted either by the organization or the individual, it is being reported and then appropriate actions are taken. Now, based on this discussion, we must move further, and another important factor which has basically been identified, that is sustainable development goals, which have been created by the United Nations. And the three elements which have discussed, which is very, very important, that now organizations are need to force to ensure that they are able to create product and services not only for the current generations, but also for the future generations. Okay. And the three elements that have been discussed in the literature relate to the social factors, economic factors and the environmental factors. They need to ensure their employee well-being, they need to ensure the quality of the people which are living in the surroundings, and also follow certain ethical practices. When it comes to economic perspective, they need to see that the extent to which they are able to create value for all the stakeholders including employees, and what extent they have been contributing to the economic development of the nation. And finally, and the most important is the environmental factors. Environmental factors, basically they need to see that these companies, those especially those companies who have been exploiting natural resources, in what way they are able to protect the natural resources of the country, because if they are not able to protect the natural resources, one day these natural resources will not be there, and then what will happen to the future generations. So, it is very important that how these SDG goals are important for the organizations. Thank you very much.